Hey there, pioneers. Welcome to the Reflections Cast, designed to immerse you in teachings about goal setting, dream building, and all things dynamic living. Join us for inspiring conversations as we unwrap these topics and offer insights for seeking positive change in your life. Here's Season 2, Episode 11, Exploring the Forest Before the Field. All right, guys. Well, I am so excited to get into this episode. It's going to be quite a bit different than our normal episode, but we have a very special guest on the show here today. And that is an author of a wonderful new book. It is entitled The Forest Before the Field. And that author is our very own Mrs. Melody Farrell. Thank you very much for being on the show, Melody.
Thank you for having me.
I personally am super stoked about this book. I'm very excited to not only get a chance to read it, but to get the message out there for others that this book is available and is definitely worth their time, definitely worth checking out. It is something that is written to empower and resource teenagers, I would say, of today, but really anybody can get a lot out of checking out this book. It's filled with wisdom, true wisdom that's artfully weaved through parables, through poetry, through references of your favorite things, or if they aren't your favorite, well, maybe this book will make it your new favorite thing. But it is definitely a book worth checking out, and I can't wait to explore it with Melody here on the show with you all. So as we get into this, if you have questions about this book or where to find it, first off, to find it, go to pioneercircle.org and click on the link that says buy the book. And there you will have a link to where you can either get email updates about when it's available, or hopefully if this interview goes up when we think it will, then the book will be available for purchase at that time. And I'm so excited for you guys to get to read it and send your questions in. And I'm sure Melody will be happy to give us a follow-up interview sometime in the future, hopefully, if we can book her again. But with that, Melody, thank you for being on the show. And I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about this book and maybe a little bit about your writing history, other works that you've been involved in.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is fun. I say thank you for having me tongue in cheek, but seriously, thank you for taking the time to talk about this book. I think it is a really cool piece of what we are doing with the future of Circle A and, the future of Dad's work in the world and our work in the world. So it's just a pretty exciting piece of it. So the book is called The Forest Before the Field, A Guide for Pioneers. And essentially, it's a collection of parable stories and simple teachings that are written specifically to be a resource for our rising generation. And like Stephen said, it is a book for anybody. I think anybody can read it and get a lot out of it. But I was really trying to focus my writing at a level that would connect with our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. These young people are really experiencing a fundamental shift in culture, but they're also, we talk about, we want the Pioneer Circle to be a resource for this rising generation who's living through the changing of an age. And, these kids are essentially living through the changing of a cultural age on the edge of modernity, but they're also experiencing their own changing of an age as they are growing from a child to an adult. And so this season of adolescence is just this incredibly formative and challenging and beautiful time of life. It's the time of life that Dad was always the most interested in investing into people because of the way that we are so immensely formed through these years. And so my goal with the book is just to kind of resource young people to live well through those changes, and to find themselves grounded in truth. So the book is focused on captivating imagination through story, through poetry, through song lyrics, and some art that we have in the book. And the hope is to capture the imagination of our youth in such a way that they are compelled with a desire to continue to pursue learning what is good and true and beautiful.
Yeah, I did want to just make comment on just the construction of the book and the layout of it, not just in the art or the typography or the font choices, but the construction of how you lay it out. Parables with poems, with like a dissection of the idea or a distillation of the point that you're making.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some actual teaching, some takeaways of teaching that are drawn from the story elements that are introduced in the book.
I feel like it feels very biblical in its construction. Like, the Bible has different sections that focus on connecting with people in different ways, whether it's through story with parable or poem or song or direct teaching. And I love the way that you've kind of tapped into that. It felt very much like, if any readers are familiar with not necessarily C.S. Lewis's Narnia series, but his other works, things like the Screwtape Letters or Problem of Pain or Great Divorce or Mere Christianity, some of those that are so wisely done, where it's this great way of keeping a reader captivated as you're also educating them on the topic that is really powerful or really interesting, and yet to connect with them on these multiple methods, I think is really smart, especially if you're trying to connect with a younger reader. But it's just a lot of fun to dive into. So I just want to give you props on trying to do something like that. And, it's like doing multiple forms of art in one thing. So I found that very enjoyable. But what was the impetus to go into writing a book for young readers in such I don't know if it's a different fashion, but in a unique fashion?
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought up C.S. Lewis. I'm definitely a C.S. Lewis fangirl. So to be compared to him in any way is just the pinnacle of life. So thank you for that. I don't think it's that good just yet, but maybe one day. I think it started with an awareness of what Dad always did, which was to teach through story. And he didn't necessarily teach through parables very often, but my goodness, most of his seminars at Circle A, at least the kid version, were stories. And he would just tell story after story. And yes, there was a lot of teaching in between the stories, but there was so much that was in story. And the stories were really what the kids remembered and talked about and came back year after year to see him tell the story of Kenny on the toboggan one more time, because they just remembered every part of the way that he told the story. And not only that, but they remembered the lesson. And so I wanted to do something like that as in honor of Dad, but also because Dad was right that that's what works and that's what connects really with everybody. It's not just kids, but especially with, middle school, high school students. So that was part of it. I chose not to use a lot of stories from my own life because, Dad had such an array of stories collected in his life that he could tell 150 stories in a dynamic living seminar and have stories to spare. My story collection maybe isn't that big yet, but I'm working on it. But I also wanted to go the parable route rather than a lot of real life stories, because I wanted to mirror the ancient writing. So I love that you brought up the biblical comparison, although it's certainly, there's pieces of the Bible that are in it. But the ancient way of teaching, the ancient way of storytelling, kind of inviting the reader into something ancient and more grand and more enchanted than the utilitarian landscape that they may be looking at in their lives right now. And so to do that with stories that kind of harken back to even their childhood and stories that they read as a kid or stories that they've loved as a kid, felt really important to me. And so, the parables in the book are original, but also involved in the teaching, I reference a lot of the great stories. So there's multiple C.S. Lewis stories. We've got Tolkien. We've got Harry Potter. We've got some Disney stories, stories that these kids are familiar with because, my goodness, there's a wealth of truth and goodness and beauty in some of these great stories. And then the other reason the idea of story felt so important to me is because essentially what I'm talking about in the book is an invitation for the reader to see and enter and exist in the one true story, which is the ultimate narrative of redemption. And so all of the stories told in this book are sort of, reflections of that one true story or pieces of that one true story. So, the goal is to really get the reader thinking in terms of narrative and engage imagination, so that the lessons that are being taught stick and mean something more than just this could be a good way to live, but really invite them into the grand tale of their becoming.
Mm-hmm. I love that you did that you took it in that direction. I think that not only do you make it approachable in that way, but you do a thing that I think you have to have a very specific set of skills to be able to pull off. And that is weaving in like real fantasy storytelling whilst also reclaiming words that I think are lost in a religious context, but you've reclaimed them and brought them back into a more religious usage, whether you're talking about magic or enchantment or a word like that. The way that you use it in this book really makes it powerful in what feels like a very old way. And I did want to just go back to asking you a little bit more about your past with writing, because this fantasy element is so powerful through the book. And I think that it gives this fun nature to a lot of your parables. And so quickly, could you tell the audience a little bit more about your experience with things like the Epic of Haven series?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I started a very small publishing company about 10 years ago. And it was kind of a dream that I'd had for a long time, a goal that I'd had for a long time. And so the first massive project that we worked on through the publishing company was a series called The Epic of Haven, which is a fantasy series by R.J. Triplett. And, I got to be very involved in the process of writing and editing that story. So, it's not my story, but it kind of is a little bit. I'm sure that RG wouldn't mind me claiming it as a little bit mine as well, because we both put a lot of time and a lot of heart into that. When you're writing a massive fantasy epic, you need several minds working full time to make sure all the stories line up and, that it's holistically beautiful. So that was a really transformative experience for me. And I've always loved that genre of storytelling. And so to be able to help create the world, help crystallize the story and see it through to completion was just something that I'll always be so proud of. And I'll treasure the experience. And so since then, I have put out quite a few other books through the publishing company. And I have ghostwritten several books that we've put out, but this is the first book that I've officially written in my name. And so that's fun too, to be in the industry and working with authors for 10 years has been awesome. But the dream was always to write my own books. So this is the first and hopefully won't be the last. So that's a little bit about the history.
I love that. And I second that. I hope it is not the last as well. I love that with this book in particular, there is real purpose and specificity in stories that you're telling and why you tell them and how they fit the poetry and how powerful that is. And I don't want to spoil anything because I want people to explore it and understand it for themselves. But I did just want to say, in a world where we get these epic fantasy or these long continuous stories, it's nice to have powerful stories with a message. Mm-hmm. There's purpose behind your words. I'm not just excited to turn the page because there's something suspenseful that's happening, but because I'm actually interested in what the conclusion will be. Okay, well, in that same idea then, in this book, you tell 7 different stories. You tell a story of love, enchantment, stewardship, connection, wholeness, virtue, and meaning. Now, how did you decide on those particular categories to kind of flesh out this wisdom that you have in this book?
Well, my initial goal was to take Dad's dynamic living seminar and translate it for the next generation. Even though I absolutely believe that anyone in the rising generation could listen to the dynamic living seminar right now and be captivated and learn so much. I do think there are things about our changing world that need to be incorporated into the way that we're equipping our young people and the resources that we're giving our young people. And so the desire was to kind of take the heart of dynamic living and some of the most important pieces of the teaching of dynamic living and repackage it in an enchanted storytelling, ancient sort of way, because from all of the experts who are studying what's happening with our culture, our society right now, we do believe that there is going to be a return to the classical virtues and to spirituality and to more openness to transcendent and enchanted sort of thinking. So this book may be a little bit ahead of that curve, but I hope that it will age well into the culture shift that is coming. So these topics, I mean, to be real clear, I literally went and sequestered myself in a condo on the beach for a week. I wrote out on sticky notes all of the general ideas from dynamic living that I wanted to make sure were incorporated into the teaching that we are going to be doing for the pioneers, both through this book, through the camp, through the Pioneer Circle. And then I kind of categorized them into a new framework of themes. And these were the 7 themes that kind of emerged. So, you can look through it and find a lot of dynamic living. You're not going to find everything, especially in this book. This book had to be toned way down to just some real simple themes because I wanted to write something short and really accessible. But as we're unpacking these themes in the bigger context of Pioneer Circle, the theme of wholeness could essentially incorporate pretty much everything from dynamic living. The theme of stewardship can incorporate so much. So, that's essentially how I came up with them, is a bunch of sticky notes on a table by myself in a room, recategorizing them into themes that I felt like our rising generation could just really gravitate to and want to learn more about. And I feel like these themes are not the holistic teaching, but they're open doors to going deeper into so much of the wisdom, both from Dad and from the scriptures and from, the ancient philosophers and from the modern philosophers, as we continue to wrestle with these questions about who we are created to become.
Well, I love what you did. And I think that trying to artfully communicate and inspire and educate future generations of kids, it's one of the most important things I think a person can do with their life. And I think that, with Dad's book, I think something that stands out to me about it is that he never truly wrote another book. I mean, he did co-write the Daily Disciplines book with you and Mike, and he did have other talks that he delved into of the same level as dynamic living. But in terms of a book that encapsulated his wisdom, Say Yes was the thing that he put his name behind as like, this is the message that I want to carry on and leave behind. And I think also, you know, in the dedication of his book, dedicating it to his kids, I feel like that is another indication of his understanding that this is something that he wants to preserve with the future generations, and that he never bothered to put anything else to pen and paper. I think just brings focus to that story. So I'm so glad that you were able to take elements of Say Yes and dynamic living and articulate it in a new way that kids can get into and grow with.
Yeah, I love that.
And especially to push it into a growing platform like Pioneer Circle, or something they can use in their understanding of the world as it is right now, I think it's so cool. And it's such a great tool for kids nowadays. Is there any thoughts that you have on putting that wisdom to pen and paper and leaving that legacy behind?
Yeah, I love that you brought up Dad's book and the dedication to his kids. I think, you know, that really was the reason that I wrote this book, was for my kids. That my kids are in this space, this middle school, early high school space. And I just see the urgent need for voices of truth and hope and wisdom and beauty in their lives, in the lives of their friends. The world that they're growing into, and the questions that they are having to ask about their place in the world, about who they are, about their values and their faith and their morality and their future. It's not an easy path ahead for this generation. It's just not. And so that's why I chose to write this book. And it's why I chose to ground it in so much of Dad's teachings, so much of the scriptures, so much of the ancient wisdom. And it's pretty cool because I have lots of book ideas in my mind. I've got I've got several like fully formed book outlines, like that are just kind of waiting for me to sit down and write them. But this is the one that kind of just jumped the line in front of all these other ones I've been, you know, sort of thinking about and tossing around in my brain for a few years. This one just kind of emerged and grew and became alive. And the reason was for my kids, if for no one else. And I remember a few months after Dad passed away, a friend of mine also passed away. And he was a pastor. His name was Patrick Wheeler. And right before he passed, he died very suddenly and unexpectedly. Right before he passed, I think the last email that he sent was to me, and it was the finished manuscript of his book. And so after he passed away, I worked with his wife to go ahead and publish that book. And I remember when I got it in the mail and I held it in my hand, I just thought of his kids. He had 7 kids. And I thought I'm so grateful that these kids have this legacy of their father, of these truths that he compiled. Although, you know, I know he would have written so many more books if he would have had more days on this earth. But these are the days that he had, and these are the words that he wrote, and his kids will always have this. And if for no one else, I'm so grateful that they have this from their dad. And so it just made me know that it was my time to do the same. So, you know, I hope that when kids read it, they feel not partially the love of a mother, but more so I'm coming to them as a guide, meeting them in this forest before they enter this field ahead that is unknown and probably scary and probably difficult. Not as a guide who's been to the field, because I haven't lived through the future. I don't know what it's going to look like, but as someone who's on the road ahead and who has learned some stories that have helped me in my journey. And so I hope that when people read it, especially when kids read it, they hear that voice of confidence in truth, and that voice of love and encouragement and hope for who they're becoming. And like I said, it's for my kids more than anybody, but I hope a lot of kids will enjoy it.
Yeah, I definitely think you could feel that purpose behind the writing, that it's not just you trying to cram a bunch of, interesting ideas into a book, but it has construction and purpose to give guidance and comfort and clarity. One thing that you do great is putting it in a way that won't degrade that wisdom. I just love that this wisdom is preserved in a way that makes it fun for kids to go back to and explore and delve deeper into. And I think that when, ideas like that aren't revisited and they aren't written down and they are just kind of lost to time, society gets stuck. It degrades. What I love about what you've done with the book is not only did you give something fun to read with a lot of amazing original content, but you gave them so many cool references to delve into to keep that imagination flowing and that excitement flowing and that continual return to that one true story. And so in the back of the book, you not only have an epilogue, you have a list of further reading for those interested, and then you even have a built-in discussion guide to preserve and continue that discussion with these kids after they've finished. So it's really a great resource for anybody who is excited about this kind of content and wants to really have a dialogue with their kids about it. So if you're a parent that's listening, check this out. It's not a difficult read. You can proof it for yourself and see how it's going to affect your kid, but give it a shot because, man, it's fun. It's a fun read. So I guess a quick question for anybody that's listening that might not be a part of Pioneer Circle. Is this something that if they aren't in that circle of dialogue that they're going to get lost with? Or is this something that anybody can pick up no matter their connection to Circle A or Pioneer Circle?
This is definitely something for anybody. This is kind of meant to be an introductory piece to everything that we're doing with Pioneer Circle and the Circle A Summit. So, this is accessible to anybody. You don't have to have any previous relationship with Circle A or Skip or Pioneer Circle in order to just kind of jump in and sit by the fire in the middle of the forest and hear some stories. So that's really all it is. And there is an invitation at the end of the book, along with all the other resources. There is an invitation to Pioneer Circle and to the summit. So, if you are part of this community and you're thinking, hey, I would love to be able to introduce somebody that I know to Pioneer Circle or to the Circle A Summit, the book is actually a great way to do that because they're going to be introduced to the themes that we are working on teaching in those spaces. So, yep, it's for everybody.
Well, I'm so excited that you did that and that it is such an approachable book. One little question just that might be more on a personal nature, but I think might be fun for the audience to just hear a chat about is the poetry. Some of it very beautiful, some of it very powerful, some of it very hard to read. But it did remind me very much of our grandmother, of Mary Lou. I don't know how many would know that, she was not an author per se, but there was one thing that she did leave her family. And that was an amazing book of poetry that she spent her later years constructing for the family. And just reading through some of your poetry, I feel there's a connection with her through you from this poetry. And I really enjoyed that. But do you want to comment at all on your construction of music? I know that you're an actual recording artist as well as author. How do you go about constructing these? Are there stories within the poetry that you can expound on at all?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. The poetry was definitely the most vulnerable piece for me to put in this book. And I definitely debated about putting it in or not because it is personal and the poetry does go along with these chapters, but some of these poems were written years before this book was written and just got placed in because they went along with the theme that I was teaching in each individual chapter. A couple of them I did write specifically for the book, but there were 5 that were previously written. So, yeah, I love that you brought up our grandma. She was definitely an incredible poet, and what a legacy she left her family. I think I do see myself as a poet, but I see myself as a poet in the broader sense of just like I have a poet's heart. I appreciate art in all forms, but specifically art with the written word. I don't write a lot of poetry, and I don't think I'm particularly amazing at writing specifically poetry. But there have been times in my life where writing poetry or music was the way that I processed pain or loss or learning or spiritual searching. So it's been very, as is for many people, it's been a therapeutic practice for me. It's been a healing practice for me. And so I chose to include it in the book because I do think there are certain minds and imaginations that do connect more to even poetry than story. And so I wanted to have that part of the written word also represented in the book. But also I wanted to use it as an invitation for our young people as they are wrestling through their own journeys and stories and becoming, to use poetry as a way of expressing their journey and processing their journey. So I figured if I'm vulnerable with my poetry to share it, hopefully that will give me enough credibility to invite them to do the same, whether it's through Pioneer Circle or at the summit or just in, discussion groups that people have. So, that's why I chose to include it.
Well, I would just say that I am certainly glad that you included it and that you were able to express that vulnerability in such a beautiful way. And I think that the poetry really adds to every part that it's included in a really fun and unique way. I hope that people are going to check this thing out and get inspired, look into these topics more thoroughly, and grow and develop into all they were created to be. All right. Well, again, I think it's important to remind everyone where they can find this book. So if you go to pioneercircle.org, O-R-G, and then click on buy the book, there will be a link there that will allow you to buy the book. Or if not, there will be a email submission area where you can find out as soon as it becomes available. Now, one little bonus question I have, Melody, that I don't know the answer to is, are there plans for a audiobook of this? Are there plans for a digital version of this? What does the future look like for The Forest Before the Field?
Yes, definitely. The ebook will launch with the paperback. So both will be available on April 18th for purchase through Amazon. And then we are in talks of the audiobook. It is a bit of a project, so we're not prepared to launch that on April 18th. But yes, I feel like, I know my kids consume 10 times more audiobooks than they do written books. So I feel like it would be foolish to not provide that resource for people. So we will be working on that and releasing it in the next few months.
Awesome. Well, guys, I hope that I did a sufficient job of encouraging you to check this out. If you're a parent, please check it out. If you're a kid, you're going to like this book. Or if you're just someone that's curious about these topics that we talk about on the podcast and all things dynamic living and all things with Pioneer Circle, check this thing out because I think you're really going to love it. Melody, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and talk to us about this awesome book that you've created. Are there ways that they can see more about other works that you've done or ways that they can stay connected when new things that you're working on might be coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. There's becoming more and more ways to connect with what we're doing in the world. I think the easiest way to keep track is probably social media. So if you follow us, Pioneer Circle on Facebook or Instagram, you'll definitely see everything there. We'll also keep everything updated at pioneercircle.org. So you can check there. And if you go to circleacamp.com, you can sign up for our newsletter called Preparing Our Pioneers, which is, just some continued teaching and content that's going to come out periodically. And that'll also have any links to anything new that we are doing. So definitely connect with us and we'll keep you up to date about everything that's happening for the future of Circle A.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you, audience, for joining us here today on this very special episode of the Reflections Cast. And remember that your support means everything. So if you enjoyed this episode, this interview with this awesome author, please hit that like button, write us a review, or leave us a message, and share this episode with friends, family, or anyone you think might benefit from our discussions. We believe in you, and we are committed to helping you thrive on this journey of discovering all you were created to be. And until next time, keep reflecting, keep growing, and pass it on.